Talking landscape photography with Christian Fletcher and Carwyn.
Welcome to the very first podcast of Lightminded. My name is Carwyn, joined today by Christian Fletcher.
How are you, legends?
There we go,
Hey.
Christian.
Hey, how are you? Yeah, that was a nice intro. Thanks, Carwyn.
It wasn't me.
Who was that guest?
Just listen to this.
I risk my life taking these photographs.
Oh, wow, someone who's definitely a thrill seeker.
He's a great Australian and great photographer. Mr. Peter Lick, he couldn't join us today, so it's myself and Christian Fletcher. Mate, our very first podcast, how did this come about?
Well, you actually called me and said, hey, I'd like to do a podcast. What do you reckon? And I thought, okay, yeah, that sounds good. I'm not sure if I'm much of a radio star, but you are, so yeah, I went with it. But that was last year sometime, wasn't it? Probably more than 6 months ago.
Yeah, it takes a while to coordinate these sort of things and, just to sort of get the right, format and the link ups and that sort of stuff, because I'm in Perth and you're in
Dunsborough.
Cold old Dunsborough today, so...
Freezing.
Mate.
It's like 8 degrees. I'm in a sea container, so I'm talking about a metal box, and it must be 8 degrees in here. I've got my little nano blanket on my lap, and I'm still cold. But I'm looking at you, and you've got a t-shirt on. What's with that?
Well, it's 13.5 degrees here in Perth. It's actually, it's balmy.
Yeah, no, 13.5 degrees. I would still have a nano blanket on my lap. That's pretty cold anyway. But you came up with this brilliant idea and thought that maybe someone would be interested in listening to what we had to say. So, what's your background in photography?
Well, look, I was a radio announcer, and so I just did, bit jobs like casual stuff doing music announcing. So I worked in Perth on a couple of commercial stations, then worked in Sydney. And then I found myself in the position of doing music radio in Sydney, and, it was the dream. We're broadcasting in Sydney, like this is the pinnacle. And then all of a sudden our radio station died in the arse, for want of a better word, and we hired Kyle Sandilands, who, if you're an American listener, is a very big controversial DJ over here. So the whole nature of our radio station changed. So we went from like an oldies sort of format to more of a hot radio sort of controversial style format. But so there wasn't a place for me in the station. And that's when I decided to take photography seriously. I thought, well, I'm not going to make it on radio. I may as well try and teach myself how to take photos. So from that moment, and that was 5 or 6 years ago, I've been shooting every day. So I started shooting at Yena Bay in Sydney. So shooting sunrise with the sun actually coming up over the water at sunrise, which is quite a novelty because in the West, we just, that happens at sunset. And,
Unless you live in Dunsborough.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, I didn't think. So
yeah, we get it coming up over the water if we want to, and whatever we want to do. Yeah, we've got it all down here.
That's pretty much it. I probably take about 20 or 30,000 photos a year, and I'm just, trying to get better and that sort of stuff, and, looking at Christian stuff to try and get a bit of inspiration. But yeah, no, I'm nowhere compared to you, mate. So how did it start for you? Like, where did the passion start?
I got a camera when I was 15. I went thirds with my brother and my dad, and I was the only one that really picked the camera up and decided to do something with it. But, when you're 15, you don't really enjoy anything. I've got a 15-year-old son at the moment, and he's still in bed. What time is it now? 10:30. I don't think I'll see him till probably 11:30. Right. So as a 15-year-old kid, I had it, but I wasn't really that committed. But I had a surfing accident when I was 18. I was on holidays from work. I was working in the public service as a clerk, and because I cut my leg on when I was surfing, I couldn't go back in the water. I had 3 weeks left on my holidays, and I had nothing else that I could do.
Was that in Dunsborough?
No, this was in Perth, actually. So I started in Perth, just mucking around with the camera. And in those 3 weeks, I picked up the camera and put a roll of slide film in and started mucking around, and I got these little slides back, and I just thought it was quite interesting. And then I was doing all the things that you do as a kid with a camera. You take a photograph of the sink, and then there's a set of keys, and then you start playing with the torch and doing a long exposure and all that stuff, which is really, it's just crazy. So
who taught you?
I just taught myself. It was just a matter of I got a black and white darkroom. So going forward quite a few years, I was doing some other jobs, and then I decided to move down to Dunsborough, and that's when I thought, well, I'm going to become a photographer full time because I had no skills, I had no training, I wasn't university educated or anything like that. I just wanted to get into photography because I thought that would be something that I would enjoy doing because I enjoyed it when I was younger. So I set up a black and white darkroom, and from that I was able to work on composition, and composition was the big thing. I mean, obviously I was shooting black and white, developing my own, so I was rolling the film, making the prints, doing the whole bit. That was what sort of taught me how to get things right because I was doing so much of it. Like yourself, I was taking lots of shots. Obviously, film, it's a little bit slower and it's a little bit less than a digital camera, but I really loved the process. I fell in love with making prints, and I made so many mistakes along the way. Eventually, I learned to get it right and continued on, and digital came across, and I moved across to digital, and the rest is history. But I mean, that's 29 years ago.
Who was around at that time? Did you follow other landscape guys or girls?
No, I didn't actually know anybody in those days. I was in Dunsborough. It was a town of 700 people, I think, at the time. I just started taking photographs of me, and I didn't know of Ken Duncan or Peter Lick or any of these guys. Ken started first, I think, and then Peter Lick and I were starting out around the same time. But I never saw any of their work. I was pretty isolated down here in the southwest and just did my own thing. Where I was influenced was when I went to America in 2000, and I just bought a Fuji GX617 film camera, and that was when I started to look at panoramic images. I don't know why I bought that. I can't remember seeing Ken's work and going, "Oh, I want to do panoramics." It was just a camera that I'd found in a shop or on. I was going to say online, but I'm not even sure if there was online then. And there must have been.
You just decided that was going to be your thing, is to do big panos?
Yeah, because I started out, I wanted to be a landscape photographer and take photos and sell them in a gallery or a restaurant. At that time, my brother had a restaurant down here in Dunsborough. So I thought, well, I'll just take photos, I'll frame them and I'll put them in his restaurant and I'll sell them. And that's how I'll make my money. But of course, when I got into photography, I got sucked into the weddings and the portraits and commercial work, and I did that for 6 years and hated it. And then eventually gave up for like a couple of days, and then realized, no, I want to do landscapes again. So I became more interested in purely doing landscapes and making money from that. So I was working 3 jobs trying to make ends meet, and eventually I was making enough nice images and selling enough to make that my sole occupation. That's when I started my first gallery. And the panoramic was great. It was a format that was relatively new, I guess, at the time. It was not many people were doing that, and these large panoramic colored pieces, decor pieces, were quite interesting to me. So that's what I want to do. I went to America and I was influenced by a guy named Michael Fatale, who's a very controversial figure because he set fire to the national parks and ended up getting in a bit of trouble for that, which is
that never goes down too well.
I want to do. Yeah. So I didn't follow him down that route and set fire to any national parks here in Australia, but I did see his work, and I was devastated because it was so good, and I thought, wow, how do I ever achieve that level of quality? Because his stuff just blew me away. And I was looking at these prints. They were Cibachromes, big Cibachromes. Well, when I say big Cibachromes, I think they're only about 30 by 40 inches, but I'd never seen a print that big before. So when I saw that, I was just gobsmacked, and I walked out of his gallery so depressed. I thought, oh, that's it. I'm going to hang up my camera. I can't do this. I'm never going to achieve that quality. I don't even know how to start. And I was very disappointed. But then, because I was in America, and I saw that, and I had this camera, I thought, how am I going to get these transparencies printed? And there was people doing Cibachromes in Australia, but not to the same level. This guy had a printer, and you don't choose him, he chose you, this guy. So your work's got to be worthy.
Wow.
And I didn't have any contacts in Australia that could do that sort of work. So then I started to look into digital, and that's when I bought my first film scanner. I came back, and all this time I had no money. I was pretty much just living on a naughty rag,
living an artist's life.
Yeah, that's right. And literally had to scrape together enough money to buy this film scanner, which was $16,500.
Whoa.
And for me at the time was it's a big money. It was a Imicon Flex type photo, but it's an awesome bit of kit. And the reason I bought it is because I was going to get all my images scanned, and I worked out that it was going to, I think it was $40 a scan, and I had at least 400 images I wanted to get scanned. So there's $16,000 right there. So I thought, I may as well just buy the damn thing, and I'll have it paid off in no time. So I did, and I don't even know where I got the money from. I must have sold something. It was really it was a tough old game in those days, but luckily there wasn't as much competition.
In those days, like particularly when you were in the United States, were you ever influenced by the masters, like the Ansel Adams? Did you like his stuff? Did you get anything from that?
Yeah. I can't remember if I actually saw any of it. There was a couple of other guys as well. There's a guy named Jim Brandenburg, who I really liked. His stuff was really quite beautiful. And there's a David Munich, I think his name was David Munich, something like that. And all these guys were amazing, and of course America's so beautiful. And I'm looking at these pictures, and I'm thinking, wow, that's going to be pretty hard to achieve. So there was quite a few. Ansel Adams, obviously, I can't remember if I actually saw any of his work while I was there. Even though I was at Yosemite, I'm not sure if there was images there. But yeah, again, that was all way beyond me as well. The black and white work he was doing was nothing like I could achieve. So yeah, it just goes to show that you can start out doubting yourself, and you can get there in the end. It's not difficult. You just got to know what the processes are. And I can teach anybody to be good at Photoshop, but the hardest thing is to be good at composition. I think that's where it's really hard to teach that, and that's something that you can see. People can tell you all the rules, but you need to go out and break them lots of times to realize for yourself, okay, that's where I should have composed the shot. So I've got that now. I mean, I've been able to make compositions relatively easily because I feel it. It's like, okay, that's where the camera should be pointed. It's
more of you don't think so much about the composition, you feel the composition.
Yeah, that sounds a little bit wanky, doesn't it? But it's pretty true. I feel it, man.
Yeah,
it's about vibe.
Yeah, it's just like you feel the scene, and next thing,
The shot's actually bloody insane. It's beautiful.
and that's what happens.
Yeah, it is. It's insanely beautiful sometimes. Yeah, sometimes you just can't miss it.
Look, you've made a good career out of landscape photography, and look, I talk to a lot of photographers when I go out to the spots, like it might be Sugarloaf Rock or taking photos of the city or at the beach, and you bump into a lot of landscape photographers, and the one thing that we invariably always end up discussing is, how do I sell my work? Like, how do I make money out of this?
Yeah. I'd like to know the answer to that as well. It's getting increasingly hard, but it is a difficult one, and I guess that just comes with time. I always say to people, you can have the best photos, but if you haven't got the best brand, or if you haven't got the best marketing, people just don't see your work. And it's a sad fact that some of the best creatives out there probably never make $1 out of their work because no one sees it. And for me, being in the industry for 29 years, you just get known. So my brand is built on the fact that I've been here for that long and managed to survive and just put up with the meager pickings in the early days, and now we're at a time now where so many people can take great photographs.
People are shooting great stuff with smartphones.
Yeah, which is something we need to talk about in the next podcast. But yeah, there's so much competition. You've got to stay ahead of the pack. You've got to have a good brand. You've got to be out there showing people your work, and that just takes time. It's nothing that you can do overnight. I mean, you can get some lucky breaks, which might help you along, but to have a career in this industry and to a long career, it just takes something else. You can't just expect. You can't sit back and wait for it to come to you. You've got to go out to the world with your stuff, and I'm sure that's the same with every art form and every artist. It's
quite amazing because I've seen a lot of work from people that shoot a lot, and because they're artists, they probably don't have the propensity to set up a deal and a business plan to sell their stuff. And I see their work, and I've seen some stuff, and I've just gone, that is just amazing. I just don't get it. I guess, like you said, it's that whole, proliferation of cameras everywhere. And ironically, we're in this time at the moment where I reckon that there has never been as much photography than there is right now in the history of humanity ever. But the irony is, I reckon 90% of that's going to disappear. We're going to have nothing to show for it in 10 years.
Yeah, look, I love making prints. That's, for me, the young kids will take their selfies and they'll have them on their Instagram or whatever, Snapchat. But I love making a print, and that is the ultimate game with photography. Is you want a physical print. You want something that you can put in an album or put on your wall. And there's something about that process. It's always been that way from day one. It's all about the print. And now with digital and technology, it's all changing. So it's going to be on screens and iPads and phones. And I just don't think it's the same.
No, it's wasted because, if you look at, stuff like Instagram, and look, somebody listening to this podcast in 10 years' time will probably be going, what the hell is Instagram? And that's the point. So, these people are out there taking these amazing shots, but the way they're saved is terrible. Like, the compression on Instagram is terrible. Instagram's probably not even going to be around. So that's all gone. So it's not actually a photo until you actually print it, and then it's archival.
Yeah,
I guess.
Yeah. No, it's crazy, but I guess we're a couple of older guys that are in an industry that's changing all the time, and it does change. And I'm hoping that with this podcast we can talk about those changes, and maybe then we can try and keep up with all the cool kids that are doing all the interesting stuff. And look, I like technology, and I like the way things are going, and I do like showing images in different ways, bigger screens, all that sort of stuff, TVs. But I think when it comes down to it, the print there's something special about that print. And I remember being at a trade show, and there was a guy who was showing me work that he had taken. It's all black and white, but he'd shot it on a Hasselblad, and it was beautiful. He had this little box, and he pulled it out, and I remember looking at these prints, and they weren't massive, but the quality of this black and white printing and the feel of it just impressed me. And I was like, wow, I want to do that. I want that. And I've never done that, actually. I've only ever just made other sort of prints, but not this beautiful little portfolio. It was just so neat. Everything was flat and gorgeous. I could just imagine putting that aside and in a cabinet for 50 years, and then pulling it out and showing your kids or whatever, or whoever wants it, and how things have changed, and just that fine craft that they were doing. And you look at some of the photographs that were made way back when, they're better than the ones that are made today.
Absolutely. And look, unfortunately, we've just recently had somebody in the family pass away, so I've taken on the responsibility of scanning the photos and cleaning the photos up. And I found myself working on a photo yesterday that would have been 40 years old.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. And look, the retouching was actually done by hand. And when I actually worked on this shot, I took it out of the frame, and there was actually another photo hidden behind that photo. Another family photo. So back in the day, when somebody put that frame together, they actually slipped another photo in there. And it's like, it's like a tangible thing. Like, it's actually, like, you've actually captured that moment in time. Like, you actually own that moment in time. It's not just a digital file. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, imagine art. Imagine if all art and all photography went digital and never came off a screen. People's walls and homes would just be bare and just barren and boring.
White walls. Look, I've just had an idea. Like, why don't we just ask the people listening to this podcast if they want us to, or probably more you, to have a look at their shots and maybe give them some feedback. What do you reckon?
I think that's a great idea. Yeah. All they need to do is send them in to us. So we've got an email address that they can send it to. Lightminded617@gmail.com. Send those photos in, and we'll give you some positive feedback. Yeah, and will we be able to put them up on our Instagram page or something like that?
Yes, we will. I knew you were going to ask me about that because I actually set up an Instagram page last week, and if you just bear with me 1 second, Christian, I'll find you
in the deep end.
The address.
I better get my phone out and just see if I can see it.
Well, just while I find this address, who's the best, sort of landscape person at the moment that you know of?
Best landscape.
Yeah, like who's exciting besides me?
Yeah. Well, look, I've got some good mates that are brilliant photographers. Of course, Tony Hewitt and Peter Eastway. I love what those guys do.
Actually, I've recently discovered a guy in Florida. His name is Henthorne. I don't know a lot about him, but I've actually reached out to him on Instagram, which I'll get to shortly. I'm going to give you our address. So he's going to have a chat with us at some stage. But he does extreme long exposure landscapes, but he'll actually create the scene. So he'll build a texture into the beach, and he's amazing. So have a look at his stuff on Instagram. He's very inspirational, and we'll have a chat with him in a couple of weeks' time. But look, what we're going to do is when you send us the photos, we'll have a quick chat about them and give you some feedback. And we're also going to post those on our Instagram page. So if you do a search for Lightminded podcast, so it's actually 3 words, Lightminded podcast on Instagram, and we'll post your stuff on Instagram and give you some feedback.
Hang on, is that like-minded or light-minded?
It's Lightminded podcast.
Okay.
Have you got that? Have you done a search for that?
We've got 11 followers already.
Yeah, we're legends. Wow.
Yeah, well, I better follow. There's 12 now.
Far out.
So who did you get? You get all your family to follow, did you?
Yeah. Just people I met on the street said, "Oh, please,
yeah.
please, can you follow us? We'll crank out some more photos." All right, Christian, we better wrap it up. And look, I guess let's talk about the next podcast. We're going to be talking about smartphones in photography.
Yes, yeah. We're going to look at the new Huawei P30 Pro. I think it's going to be. I haven't got my hands on it yet, but I'll be getting one fairly soon, and I think it's going to be just a ripper little camera phone to have. Also, we've got some guests coming up. I want to speak to Tony Hewitt about his work, his trip around Australia in light aircraft, and also
Fantastic.
Lau, he's the vice president of R&D from Phase 1. He's going to talk about all the new Phase 1 gear, which is going to be pretty cool.
Far out.
And we're gonna have lots of interesting guests on this podcast. So yeah, stay tuned. It's going to be exciting.
Send us an email, lightminded617@gmail.com.